All right, now we have our first panel of the day, Diversity in Tech and How We Can Go Further, hosted by Rachel Tonner with Abby Hawker and Joshua Hobson.
Hi guys, welcome. I'm Rachel Tonner, I'm VP of Marketing for Klevu. We're a search and merchandising software. You might be wondering first why a panel of 3 white people is talking about diversity and inclusion. This panel is focused on the LGBTQ plus experience within e-commerce, as Josh and I are both on the Leaders Committee of E-commerce Pride. But these things that we're going to talk about can be, it can go into any type of kind of diversity and inclusion program, and we'll be talking about kind of how that can arise from the values of an organization. Just a quick show of hands from the audience, if you could. So who here works for an e-commerce brand? Hands up? Yeah, okay. And who here is with an agency or a developer? Brilliant. Who shops online? Almost everyone, yeah, awesome. And who here identifies as a kind of minority group? So it could be, neurodiverse or LGBTQ plus. Okay, cool. So let's quickly introduce the panel. I'm going to start with myself. I've already told you who I am, but we're also going to talk about, our gender identity and also our ethnicity and our sexual orientation, just to kind of put it all out there. So I'm a queer woman, I'm white, but also born Jewish, and I identify as a woman.
My name is Josh, hello. I am a white, northern, working class gay man. I am the head of growth at Vervaunt. We're an e-commerce consultancy and paid media agency, but like Rachel said, I'm on the Leaders Committee and co-founded E-commerce Pride, which is a e-commerce community celebrating all things LGBTQ plus within e-commerce.
My name's Abby Hawker. I am white, hetero, cisgender, so I identify with the gender that I was assigned at birth. And I run a communications consultancy that specializes in trans and non-binary inclusion and awareness.
Amazing. So we really believe, and we've had just only a couple discussions prior to today, but inclusivity is really kind of like human nature. It's a human thing. And yeah, just by being up here today and talking about who we are and what we're going to talk about today, you can take these ideas and pull them into any kind of inclusivity program. So Abby, you work for TransmissionPR. Can you tell us a little bit about that and kind of what is your background and why Transmission? What do you do?
Of course. So I've been in comms for about 22 years, and about 8 years ago, one of my clients approached me and said that they were thinking of setting up a healthcare company for trans and non-binary people, and did I want to help? And it was 8 years ago, the kind of media frenzy wasn't what it is today. And so I was like, yeah, sounds cool. I'd worked with massive brands like British Airways and Gillette and Braun, and less sexy clients like roofing and cladding companies and aggregates. So I'd kind of done anything and everything. And I'm particularly passionate about healthcare, so I thought it sounded interesting. And I did that for 6 years. And then I set up Transmission, which is focused on all types of sectors rather than just primarily in healthcare.
Cool. And Josh, as a gay man in tech, kind of what has been your experience? What could have been different in the companies that you've worked with to help you grow?
Yeah, sure. So I think in general, I worked in e-commerce for maybe about 8 or 9 years or so. In general, it's been lovely. Everyone is quite kind and generous in my experience. It might not be in other people's, but in mine, never really been discriminated against too much. However, we were talking earlier, and I think one of the things that I've definitely noticed was just general homophobic jokes or comments. Nothing maybe too alarming, but definitely just little things that get under my skin maybe in the past. But one thing that I did notice was that usually stopped when I then told them that I was gay, or they found out I was gay, which generally just made me question then, like, are they continuing maybe behind my back with other kind of people when they're talking or whatever, which is why kind of allyship is important. And again, that kind of transcends kind of all kind of ethnicities or able-bodied discrimination or whatever it is, that allyship is really important. But yeah, in general, it's been lovely. But one of the reasons why I set up e-commerce Pride was I know that's not always my experience, and I wanted to make sure that there was a community for everybody there. So yeah, generally it's been lovely, but yeah, still lots of things to do.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually been married to a man for 13 years. I love him, but that doesn't change who I am as a queer woman. And I think it's only taken me the last few years, like kind of coming out again almost, like to be an ally to the community that has been an ally to me in the past. And it is, sometimes you can kind of hide in plain sight if you want to, but that's not always the best way. But sometimes you do it for your safety as well, I'm sure. Certain people. So what are some tips that you guys have for companies to kind of get inclusion right in the first place? Because we see a lot of it sometimes as like a box ticking exercise, but what can companies do to get those programs working and working well for the benefit of their employees?
I think like anything, it's about understanding why you're doing it and kind of going back to the beginning. Looking at how that then fits into the values of the organization and then rolling campaigns or policies and processes on top of that. Because if you embed it into your company values, then it's much harder for people to attack you on, because obviously there is a lot of hey, I'm speaking specifically in relation to gender diversity, obviously, because that's what I do. But it's much harder for a company to be pulled up if the reason it's doing that, if the reason it's being inclusive is coming from the right place, if it's genuine. I think the challenges that companies have often is that they only focus on doing something during Pride Month, so it comes across as very performative, and you don't have to do much to make it more meaningful than that, because I think people get quite excited about Pride Month. They get very involved, they kind of put on big displays of support. And actually that can be channeled throughout the year at kind of various points just to make it more meaningful and come across as being more authentic, which is really important.
Yeah, and I think that's also the same, whether it's Pride Month, whether it's Black History Month, whether it's International Women's Day. I don't know why you only get a day. But yeah, it's the same kind of for all of those groups as well. And I think on the back of that, I think doing the work is important. Like, yes, doing something lovely in Pride Month, like launching a new product, or if you're sponsoring a Pride March or whatever, that is lovely, but doing the work, like raising money for charities and causes, getting involved in the community, actually listening to people who are within those communities, like actually just doing the work is also like really important, especially in the climate that we are in kind of at the moment. Don't just put some money behind it and think my job's done. Like as a company, as an employer, as a retailer or whatever it is, just doing the work is important.
Yeah, and I guess that businesses can kind of get into that cycle, that marketing calendar cycle of this is what we do on this day and this month, and it's just about taking that extra moment, and as a business, the leadership in the business too, or even the marketing team that's doing it, taking that extra moment to recognize, okay, I can do this now, and I can also do it another time. And just being brave enough to kind of put those proposals in place and plans in place. Yeah. You mentioned about like some things that companies can do, like getting to the core values of it and doing it from a place of meaning. Are there some recent examples where that like didn't happen, where something has gone wrong? I know we were talking about Bud Light, right?
Endless.
Yeah.
Honestly, sometimes it drives me so mad because I see people doing the same thing and making the same mistakes. And, Bud Light's a great example. I don't know whether you saw it, but essentially they chose to work with a trans influencer, and they're sort of the right-wing kind of Bud Light drinkers hated it. And there was a massive backlash, and Bud Light were asked to release a comment, and they stayed quiet. I think it was about 2 weeks later, they kind of said, oh, we don't want to cause any division. Oh, well done. Thanks. And that's the point. It's about if they'd beforehand, firstly, if they'd have said, okay, let's analyse our audience, this is something that's going to sit well, they probably would have said, actually, maybe it's not going to, so they would have done something different. But had they analysed their audience and said, yes, actually, this matters to the people that we want to drink our beer, then they probably would have approached the whole thing very differently. And that's what it's about. And that's why I said about understanding your why, understanding why it matters to you. Because if you understand why, then you bring people along from the very outset at all levels. And that's the most important part. But Bud Light are not the only example. We see it like literally constantly. There was a fashion brand that did it recently. They had a campaign for Valentine's Day. They put up a trans model. They got some backlash. They took down the trans model. They left everybody else. You know, and they didn't put a statement out. They didn't protect the talent. They just kind of, you know, let's be quiet and hope that it goes away. And that poor person who, you know, the model in the campaign just received a load of hate.
Yeah, so it's about protecting the actual people too. It's, you know, these are human beings who are being called in to model.
Which reflects better on the business.
Yeah, yeah. So we're in the UK, obviously, today, but there's very different kind of things going on between the UK and the US right now in terms of like LGBTQ plus rights. You've recently been to the US.
Yes.
You know, what is the kind of difference between the two countries at the moment? Some differences.
I'm very lucky to recently went to New York. Actually went to New York Pride. The year before, I went to Washington, D.C. Pride. And I think one of the things that I took away from both of those was in the US, it felt like these Pride parades have been a protest. They are like protesting against some really brutal anti-LGBT stuff going on in the US. In the UK, it's always felt like Pride has been a celebration, it's been a party. I've usually just got drunk and it's been great. But this year, because there has been a lot of like anti-trans rhetoric, there's been a lot of there's just been a lot of brutal stuff going on in the UK as well. That this year feels different. This year feels like it is going back to a protest a little bit. There are actual causes, there are actual human beings, there are actual lives that are being kind of lost even in the UK here now. I think there have been differences, but I think recently things are difficult here as well. It's not lovely here in the UK. Things are getting bad again, which is a bit worrying. But there are people actually fighting and people are protesting again, which is great. But yeah, I think it's definitely just the vibe that I felt.
Yeah, I kind of felt that too as well, because when I was leaving New York, coming to move to the UK in about 2008, the 5 years prior, like I'd always gone to like the Dyke March and the Pride March and stuff, and it was definitely more of a protest then. And then it kind of went a little bit okay, like it turned into more of a party, but it's definitely gone back into kind of protest level. And I think within e-commerce businesses, and just businesses in general, but we're talking about e-commerce, you know, people need to recognize that their employees might be in a vulnerable state too, because of all the stuff that's going on, you know. Abby, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, just that this is the first time. I think it's very much been seen as a celebration in the UK, even though it's a protest. But this is the first year that I've seen the community actively calling for allies to remember that it's a protest and to step up and to put, you know, great, wave the flags, thank you, we really appreciate it, but do a little bit more. You know, look at how, as an organisation, when you come to the end of Pride Month, that what else could you be doing? If that's the first time you've ever dipped a toe in it, what else? What happens for the rest of the year? What happens now? I think from our perspective, looking at kind of the difference between the US and the UK, it's massively stark in that, we work with healthcare companies, and in the UK, you might get someone going onto Twitter being transphobic, but in the US, someone could walk into one of my clients with a gun, and that is the very real fact of the matter. And unfortunately, with all of the negative narratives that are being pushed out, which are positioning gender diverse people as a threat, that's just making it worse.
I'm going to come on to a moment kind of about green flags and red flags, but I actually just want to take a moment to stop and talk about AI and the role of AI in all of this, what we're talking about here. You know, we've had a recent boom and like acceleration and hype cycle about AI. What is the role of AI in kind of perpetuating exclusion? And how can we kind of overcome that as an industry?
Yeah, I mean, from a kind of ChatGPT perspective, for example, other options are available. But from that sort of perspective, it's drawing, these technologies are drawing on the body of information that's out there. So if you are, for example, if you put in a question and it asks a question about, say, gender identity, and that's then pulling on sources which are perpetuating a negative narrative or misinformation or disinformation, then the output of the content that you get is false from the very beginning, but you might not know that. So it's very challenging, and it's really important to be able to kind of counter that narrative and push out information which is valid and real. But unfortunately, when you have certain media outlets like the Daily Mail, I've got some kind of figures here, but in January 2013, the Daily Mail published 6 articles about trans people. In January 2023, in 1 month, they published 115, 87% of which were negative, and trans people represent 1% of the population. It's, there is an agenda, unfortunately. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's all about ad revenue and generating clicks based on, salacious story, quick, click here. And it's just not real, unfortunately. But it's continuing, and that's kind of the key challenge, I think, from an AI perspective, digging from a pool which is already, polluted.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking earlier as well about the use of AI to create imagery as well, which is super popular at the moment, especially with e-commerce brands. They want to use AI to produce product imagery, product models, etc. And we found that with product models, when you're using AI, something like Midjourney or others, it can't create images of people of color. It can't create images of trans people. It can't create images of drag queens, we found out. But they're not represented very well in the media. So when they are pulling on that pool, they just can't create these images. Or if they are creating these images, they may be creating a really bad stereotype of these people because that's what the pool is coming from. And if you're maybe not part of that community or you're not consulting with other people within that community, you might be using these images, not really noticing that there's anything wrong with them or there's a problem with them, but actually they can be quite dangerous sometimes. So I think when you are using AI, I think it's good to work with other experts, other people within the community to kind of double check that if you are using AI, especially when it comes to minority groups, whether it is trans people or LGBT people or people of color or able-bodied people or whatever it is, that you are kind of consulting with people within those communities so you're getting it right.
There's a really brilliant book called Technology's Not Neutral by Stephanie Hare, and that addresses some of these issues and the fact that, algorithms become inherently biased because of the people who are programming them, and then people get sort of discriminated against just because they don't fit the profile that has been kind of plugged in. And
yeah, I think there was a Netflix documentary, right, about her. We recently in the Klevu marketing team used Midjourney to create the characters for our newest marketing campaign. And in the brief, we wanted there to be really strong facial expressions and also have diversity within a diverse range of people. And we found when we were doing the prompts in Midjourney that when it was white-skinned people, the expressions were really easy to get. They were really easy to manipulate. When it was any kind of brown-skinned race, it was very, very difficult, if not impossible, to get the expressions to be emotive or human, and also the skin kind of texture was fake, plasticky, and it caused some really uncomfortable conversations internally, actually, too, because we're talking about these really heavy topics within a marketing meeting. But I guess that's the thing that we have to do, right? We have to mention these things and talk about them with each other, even if they're uncomfortable. So kind of coming back onto what can we do within our own companies? What can we do within a company to make it better? What are some clear red flags that we can see, and what are some kind of clear green flags that we can see even from the outside? Any thoughts on that?
I think one of the red flags that, again, we were talking about when we were talking about this panel was when you're looking at diversity within your organization, whether it's an agency or a brand or a technology, it's great if you are being 50% male employees, 50% female employees, a certain amount of trans people, a certain amount of LGBT people, whatever, that is great. But if then your leadership is 80% men and 20% women, or your leadership doesn't include people of color, or it doesn't include whatever minority group, that's when it can be a real red flag, because if those leadership people are making policies and making decisions about your marketing or your HR or whatever it is, they're not really representing that wider group, they might not have lived experiences of certain things. They just don't know. They're not going to think about it. And that can be a problem. That can be quite a red flag. So when companies are celebrating diversity in their organization, but in the leadership it's not really diverse, then that can be a red flag.
Yeah. And I guess, like, you know, if you don't have diversity in your leadership right now, I guess you can call on consultants, or, you know, get that help, ask those questions as well. Like, because it's hard sometimes to change leadership hard. So what can you do right now, I guess, is enlist, you know, people like Abby to help, you know. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. I think that we have humans are so kind of formulaic, aren't we? We do things until we find a way that works, and then we stick to that like glue because it works. But, you know, the way that companies recruit even from the most prestigious universities, and that's a small pool. It's a pool of a certain demographic, a certain type of person, you know, and you're not getting that diversity into the organization. And it's that diversity that leads to greater creativity, which leads to better opportunities for the company, and kind of, you know, ultimately is good for business. Apart from it being the right thing to do, it's good for business.
Yeah, the profit to be made for doing it isn't just, you should do it because it's great and it's great for the company.
Isn't that the holy grail, that we're trying to kind of do something that makes a difference, that ends up helping people, and also it makes it more lucrative for us as a business?
I think as e-commerce retailers, like I've worked with big brands like Harvey Nichols and Poundland, and, you know, I've been in the e-commerce industry for about 15 years, and best practice, right? People stick to it. It's just like, if their competitor's doing that, then they do that. And it's very like a slow-moving industry, actually. But you were talking about money before, and there's 121 billion pounds of market share from this kind of by ungendering kind of fashion and shopping. And Josh, we've just launched a petition, haven't we, at e-commerce Pride?
Yeah. So one thing that we've talked about, I mean, this is a lovely conversation about Pride in general and you know, diversity, but when it comes to e-commerce, there are like real issues and real kind of problems that we want to solve. And one of them is, especially within the fashion industry, is just gendered shopping. It's very binary. If you want to go on on a fashion website, it's just men's clothes and women's clothes. And if you don't really identify with any of them, or even if you are a woman and you just like wearing men's clothes, like that should be an option for you, and you should be able to do stuff about them. So we've launched a petition. If you go to ecommercepride.com, you'll be able to see what that petition is. But it basically identifies like about 5 things that we're kind of calling on retailers and the people that work with retailers like yourselves to action. So consider behavioral segments, make search more prominent so people can search more freely about what they want. Use diverse models, which we've talked about a little bit here. Reset personalization regularly, so it's not, you know, making assumptions, etc. Degender data collection using preferences rather than assumptions. I think assumptions is a massive thing. Obviously, Rachel, you are from, you know, Klevu, which is, you know, very kind of data heavy. So I don't know if you want to kind of talk about maybe why that's important and some of those things are, should be considered.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, oftentimes retailers will, like in a newsletter sign up, they'll ask you for your gender. And then once you click that thing, loads of assumptions are made in the marketing strategy towards you. So what I'm really passionate about is like making it more about like behavioral stuff rather than like segmenting and putting into boxes. And I think, you know, search is a really great way to start with that. And also, you know, using algorithms that draw on behavioral stuff rather than immediately putting them into those boxes. It's going to help with conversion, and it's going to help your businesses get a bit of more of that 121 billion market share that's available from people who don't, who shop like gender neutral clothing or who don't identify as any particular gender. And Klevu does that kind of automatically now anyway, but it was really surprising to me when I was reading about Google, and apparently in the Google shopping feeds, they require retailers to choose a gender for their product. Now, it's not just about fashion. It can be about anything.
Could be toys, could be...
Yeah.
Yeah, could be anything.
Deodorant, shampoo, like shoes, you know, anything at all. And then once you choose that, then your products get ranked higher. So, you know, in the kind of core of what retailers need to be doing is getting their shopping ads shown, you're already choosing gender there, and you're already kind of gendering everything when you don't need to. You really don't, because people are going to shop the way they shop, and they're just going to get annoyed with you if they have a bad experience, or they feel really gendered if they're not actually that way.
Yeah.
You know?
And some of the conversations about gender shopping are valid, you know, especially when it comes to like sizing and things like that. You want to have those conversations, but ultimately you want to make sure that it comes back to personalization on your online store. You want to make sure that an online store is catering to the individual rather than assumptions and stereotypes and things like that.
Yeah, I was speaking to Matt, who's in the back there earlier as well, who used to run Love Honey, which is a sex toy, like sexual wellness site. And he was saying that, you know, categories on that site are like for him or for her. But it's like, well, actually they're for anatomies, right? Like, it's true. So, you know, that's another kind of avenue of this where it's like, we're so conditioned to think about that gender binary when it actually doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a lot of things anymore. Especially within like the Gen Z demographic who just doesn't care. They just wear what they want to wear.
Yeah, just a piece of fabric. And also like people's gender and their gender experience can change. People might identify as a man for a certain amount of time and then figure out, no, actually I want to identify as a woman, or they might just want to, you know, be in between, might want to be genderqueer. Like binaries aren't really good for a retailer anymore. So, yeah.
Abby, you were talking earlier about like the data actually that we gather on, you know, people who identify as trans and how that might not be.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because if, you know, the reason we have male and females, because that's how it always was. You know, we only had binary in people's minds, not in reality, because we know that gender's fluid and people identify and always have as, you know, trans and non-binary. But it's only now entering the conversation and people's kind of field of vision. I was just talking about the census that was carried out, I think it was 1-2 years ago, and it was the first time there'd ever been an opportunity or they'd ever made an attempt to try and collect data around gender identity. But they, you know, I know a lot of people who, when they were asked, what is your gender? They put their gender. They didn't put the gender they were assigned at birth because they didn't want to play the game. They thought it was a nonsense, and why should they have to kind of justify who they are? So it was irrelevant anyway. Asking people to respond to census information in that way just basically meant that there is still we still have no figures. We still have no idea. I don't know how. Sorry, I gesticulate a lot, I apologise. I don't know anybody else's experience of gender. I don't know if you experience it the same way I do. We have absolutely no way of knowing. So perhaps if we remove these kind of binary segments, that will also change, and we'll see a lot more people feeling able to be a little bit more fluid in the way that they interact with the world and their experiences in general, I think.
Yeah. I'm just going to go around for some quick takeaways, but I'll start. Like, I think that from this conversation here today and like knowing who's in the room, you know, agencies have a lot of influence on your clients, and to be able to just like raise these things with clients, I think is a really good first step, because a lot of people just don't think about it. But actually, there's a real big amount of money to be made by, you know, doing this properly. You know, and there's a lot of money to be made actually by collecting the right type of data in the first place. Instead of just male or female, think about size, style, fit preferences. You know, it doesn't matter whether they're male or female. It's about how they want to look, you know. So that's kind of my key takeaway from today is like just the power that you guys have to be able to make these small changes and just raise these small, like big issues just step by step within your day-to-day. Josh?
I think my like big kind of message, especially when it comes to e-commerce pride, which is obviously kind of my background here, but it does, you know, go over all minority groups, is just do the work. Like, it's not really just okay to just, you know, put money behind everything and kind of not actually speak to communities, do your research. You do actually do the work. And also, just as a little side thing, we've talked about a lot of serious issues here, but especially when it comes to LGBT stuff, it is fun. Like, you can't just have fun with it. it is a serious issue, but it's also not a serious issue. Just have fun with it. Like, if you make mistakes, just apologize and just move on. It's not a big deal. Just have fun with it. Yeah, that's just kind of my general just feeling about this whole thing. Don't think too hard about it. It can be quite easy.
I agree. It's totally easy. It's just there's so much fear around getting it wrong. Oh my God, what if I offend somebody? You know, ultimately, you need to be thinking about bringing people's awareness levels up. So educating everybody, you know, giving some basic training into the team so that the team understands, oh, okay, right, so that means that they're the challenges. You know, we're all intelligent people. Go away, maybe have a chat with your kids who will probably say to you, oh yeah, one of my mates is trans. And then just kind of, you know, move forward with that extra bit of information. And
Yeah.
it's not scary, it's not hard or scary. It's just about it's humanity, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, panelists. And thank you to the audience. I think we're out of time. So, yeah.